We need to be the party of nationalism. And I'm a Christian, and I say it proudly. We should be Christian nationalists.
I think the 19th Amendment should be repealed. I think that because, well, first and foremost, because I'm a Christian. Where women get their voice is from their father, from their husband.
We are Americans, and Americans kneel to God and God alone.
This is Sacred Politics, Episode 3, The Intersection of Faith and Activism. For too long, Christian nationalism has been the face of Christianity in the United States. Figures like Donald Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene have been allowed to decimate a faith that was built on love and acceptance and turn it into something dirty and political, an excuse for their dangerous rhetoric and hatred. But that's not what Christianity is. And across the nation, spiritual activists have been fighting to undo the harm Christian nationalists have been inflicting on their faith and country. From advocating for human rights to political organizing in their communities, we uncover the ways religious groups and individuals have leveraged their faith to fuel positive change.
The gospel is not just a way of believing, but a way of living in the world. And all we need to do is read the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus says, sell what you have and give it to the poor. Love your enemies. The last will be first, the first will be last. This radical kind of inverting of the world so that it looks the way that God intended it to be and not the way that we kind of see it now.
Shane Claiborne is a prominent speaker, activist, and best-selling author who travels across the globe to advocate for nonviolence and serve the underprivileged. He worked with Mother Teresa in Calcutta, opposed the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and even went to jail for advocating for the homeless. His most popular book, The Irresistible Revolution, chronicles his work as an ordinary radical through his authentic faith rooted in justice and love.
I really resonate with Gandhi when he was asked about Christianity. He said, I love Jesus. I just wish the Christians acted more like him. Many people have lost the core tenets of historical evangelicalism, which has been about justice, has been about the abolition of slavery, equality for women. You would hardly know it nowadays. As I heard one pastor say, if we find ourselves climbing the ladder of upward mobility and social status, we should be careful as we climb our way up, or we might pass Jesus on his way down. Because this is about a God that is descending, from the comfort of heaven and joining the struggle here on earth. It's born as a brown-skinned Palestinian Jewish refugee child in the middle of a genocide and is executed on a cross. So that's why Jesus is radical. I think Jesus is God's profound act of divine solidarity with the suffering of the world.
Shane and many other Christians live their lives following these core values. As Galatians 5:22 through 23 says, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. These values are derived directly from Jesus Christ's teachings. But unfortunately, those aren't the voices being heard. Instead, the Christian nationalist agenda is being promoted far and wide, spreading dangerous rhetoric that is giving Christianity a bad name. Christian nationalism is the belief that Christianity defines the American nation and that the government should take active steps to keep it that way by incorporating anti-democratic notions and authoritarianism. Just as a reminder from Episode 1, it's a political movement whose goals include advocating for the integration of Christian beliefs into public policies and laws, including legislation that opposes abortion, birth control, IVF, and same-sex marriage. Education is a large focus of theirs. They not only support school prayer, but also the inclusion of religion in public school curriculum, and are opposed to comprehensive sex education. In addition, they aim to remove important history from lessons, ban books that they deem inappropriate, and punish teachers who discuss sexuality and gender in the classroom. They also promote traditional family structures and gender roles, including the opposition to LGBTQ+ rights, which they see as threatening to gender hierarchy. But not everyone wants this image of Christianity to be front and center, and they're willing to put in the work to make sure that love and acceptance lead the way.
As Gandhi said, be the change that you want to see in the world, and we're trying to be the change that we want to see in the church. I don't really dedicate a ton of energy trying to reclaim that label, but I do want to make sure that they don't hijack Jesus. And what's at stake in a lot of this is a version of evangelicalism that really is trying to camouflage its own bigotry. When you do that core fundamental litmus test of does it look like Jesus and sound like Jesus, we all know it doesn't. And so I think that's why it's really important to see some of this as not just a political crisis, but it's a deeply spiritual crisis in the church. And our reputation in the gospel, the good news of Jesus, is at stake, especially when we see people that are proclaiming to be Christian, and yet a tree is known by its fruit, and we see the fruit of it, and it is not the beautiful fruit of love that Jesus says we will be known for.
Faith should never be used as a weapon. It should be used as a way to protect and those who are most vulnerable. And so whenever I see it being weaponized in politics, to me, it's a real abuse of religion. Religion should be something that brings us together. I love doing work in the faith community because I think it's such a powerful motivating force to bring people together. And I have loved doing that work. But it's deeply offensive to me when people use religion to hurt others. That is entirely contradictory to anything that my faith has ever taught.
Katie Paris is the founder of Red, Wine, and Blue, a nonprofit organization that harnesses the power of suburban women and provides them with everything they need to successfully politically organize in their communities and beyond. They aim to handle every interaction and decision with empathy, compassion, and kindness, building a culture where care and support thrive. Many of the women involved with the organization have no past experience in activism, but Katie ensures that everyone feels welcome and educated on the topics that impact their communities. They push back against book bans, fight to protect reproductive rights, use storytelling to promote meaningful actions, and they have fun while they're doing it. And faith played a major role in the creation of Red, Wine, and Blue and in developing Katie's personal values.
I grew up in the South. Everybody went to church. And in fact, my dad was a pastor for 17 years. So much of where my faith comes from is from both my mom and dad. And both my mom and dad actually grew up in conservative families. But it was through their faith that they actually came to have a real connection to things like supporting civil rights. They actually, because of the passion of their faith in college, they were protesting the Vietnam War. They were protesting for civil rights. And for them, this was all based on taking their faith very seriously. So for me, growing up, if taking your faith seriously, being true actually about what Jesus really taught, that really posed a challenge in terms of radical hospitality, care for the poor, and real openness to all people. Jesus did not judge. And so for me, that was what faith always meant growing up. The thing about faith is that I think it's like whether you're a person of faith or not a person of faith, we're all grounded in values. I think most of us anyway. And so for me, my faith, my values are inextricably linked. So it's had something to do with all the major choices that I've made in my life, and that includes in my career. And so I really try to have an awareness of, what am I feeling called to do in my work, and where is the greatest need in the world? Where does that meet sort of where my passions and my sense of call lie?
Like Katie, Shane Claiborne harnessed his faith to create a nonprofit organization that combines Jesus and social justice. Red Letter Christians was established in 2007 by a group of Christian authors and speakers led by Tony Campolo, who gathered to discuss pressing contemporary issues, concerned that Western Christianity had strayed from its focus on Jesus and that the term evangelical was being misused to describe a voting bloc. They aimed to create a church that embodied Jesus' teachings and to reclaim evangelical to signify those who bring good news to the world. In December 2010, co-founders Tony Campolo and Shane Claiborne launched a blog to serve as a hub for the RLC network, promoting the principles of Red Letter living. Since then, Red Letter Christians has evolved into a media and movement-building organization, inspiring hundreds of thousands of Christians to emulate Jesus' love, mercy, and countercultural way of life. They're nonpartisan, believing that God isn't a Democrat or a Republican. Instead, it's about right or wrong. They ask the question, what if Jesus really meant what he said?
All of us know that there's a lot of things that have used the name Christian, but they don't look or act much like Christ at all. Well, I've heard a lot of bad music, and it doesn't make me give up on music, but it does make me want to sing a little better song. And thankfully, I think that for sure some of the loudest versions of Christianity, some of the loudest voices haven't always been singing the best version of our faith. But my friend Richard Rohr says that the best correction to what's gone wrong is the practice of something better. So we live out a better version. We sing a better song. And I think what's also important is that sometimes the Christianity that has captured the airwaves or hijacked the headlines or kind of, pretends to represent all of Christianity, but doesn't look much like Jesus. That eclipses some of the narrative. But at Red Letter Christians, what we say is that we're going to change the narrative by changing the narrators and celebrating people who are living out beautiful versions of their faith.
Cherry picking is a phrase commonly used when describing how people view the teachings of God in the Bible. For example, rather than follow the countless verses telling them to love their neighbor, people often focus on contentious issues like abortion and homosexuality in the Bible due to the cultural and political climate, which makes these topics highly politicized and polarizing. Religious leaders and communities emphasize these issues to align with or oppose prevailing societal movements, making them more prominent in public discourse. They provide clear-cut moral guidelines, which are easier to articulate and rally around compared to more nuanced concepts like compassion and justice. Media attention amplifies these topics, creating a feedback loop where they are continuously highlighted in public debates. But despite this, many religious individuals and communities do emphasize positive teachings of the Bible, such as compassion, justice, love, and mercy, often living out these values through acts of service, charity, and advocacy, even if these aspects receive less attention in public discussions. No matter how you view the Bible or what you glean from its contents, faith is a powerful motivator. A sense of purpose and meaningful faith provides direction and motivation. While the Bible emphasizes the importance of justice, compassion, and giving, the belief of a higher purpose can sustain that commitment, even when progress seems slow. And a strong faith community works as a support network for activists. They provide resources and encouragement, making activism more effective and sustainable. You're never alone in the fight. You have people standing beside you. Unfortunately, the positivity of faith has been buried beneath the negative portrayal of faith that Christian nationalism provides. Christians and non-Christians alike are turning away from the church in droves. But how can we blame them? If the only version of faith you see is a harmful one, and you want to create positive change, turning away seems to be the only choice.
Ultimately, the politicization of faith is turned off so many people from the church. So for me, faith has been a real positive force in my life. in terms of helping me understand myself, helping me seek connection to others. And, I want that for people. I think that that's been a good thing in my life. And it's something that I want others to be able to experience as well. So when we have this politicization of the church, people look at that and they go, I don't want anything to do with that. So it's turning people away from religion and faith. And I think the same is true in particular on these issues, because it'll go so hard, so hateful in terms of, particularly on issues of reproductive rights and gay marriage, as we've seen over the years, and people just get more and more turned off. So that's where they really give away the game. If they actually wanted to expand the faith, expand the church, they would be working to make it be something that people actually wanted to be a part of. And in fact, they're turning people off.
The defining issues of many Christian nationalists have been abortion and sexuality, particularly same-sex unions or LGBTQ rights, and standing against that. And these are two issues that Jesus doesn't even mention. And Scripture only mentions in a way that we can maybe confer meaning onto Scriptures. But even the 6 Bible verses that talk about same-sex relationships, or we might even be more accurate, there's several different words in the original language, but they are all about exploitation and abuse. They are actually not about love and consensual relationships like we would think of, LGBT folks today. So I don't think that you can get to the kind of ideology that has come to characterize and define Christian nationalists, and even folks really that would stand against the sort of love and rights of all people. Jesus' harshest words in the gospel. Jesus is the embodiment of love, but his harshest language, like brood of vipers, is not for people on the fringes of the faith, but it is for the religious people, the teachers of the law, those who were a part of the religious elite of his time. And he calls them a brood of vipers. and he says to them, the tax collectors and the prostitutes are entering the kingdom of God ahead of you. This is the people that you have pushed out are coming into the kingdom ahead of you. This is really stunning to think that that Jesus even says you go across land and sea to make a single convert, and then you make them, twice the sons of hell that you are. So this is really should cause all of us to consider the people who are frustrated by the things that we say, and the people who are magnetized by the love that we show. I think that Jesus loved the rich and the religious folks, but he was also trying to free them of the kind of religion that was so hurtful, the kind of legalism that was so exclusive.
From Martin Luther King Jr. to Mother Teresa, religion has been the guiding light for activism throughout history. But slowly over time, Christianity has become something that's seen as Republican-owned. In the 1970s, only 40% of white evangelicals who attended church weekly identified as Republicans. Today, that figure has surged to a record high of 70%. The term evangelical and Republican have become synonymous. And in the process, they're pushing away people who feel like their faith has been hijacked by a party that promotes beliefs far from their own.
It's a constant theme throughout my work with Red, Wine, and Blue, meeting women who are turning their backs on the Republican Party because they do feel like their faith has been co-opted by the Republican Party, and they feel like the values are inconsistent. They feel it just feels gross to them, and they want to be able to be role models to their children, role models in their communities. and in their churches, and instead they feel like they're being used as pawns. So I think that that's part of the journey for many women who sort of think, okay, well, am I going to just go along with this? Or am I going to recognize that this is a political strategy and I actually want to stay true to my actual faith and values? So that means I need to turn my back on the politicization of my faith instead to be the person that I want to be in my life and to embrace my true values.
It's clear that we need to shift the narrative from a Christianity riddled with hatred to one that represents what the Bible really preached, to love God and love others. But before we jump headfirst into the world of activism, we need to start by reflecting upon our own faith and how it's impacted us.
I always say that religion, in its purest form, should be a conduit that will help people not only nurture a person's individuality and spirituality, but to help show them what it means to have this relationship with the divine. And if that means questioning, if that means needing to go away and come back and integrate with other people, that is what organized religion should do. However, early on, when it became married to power, and people understood how much if you manipulated someone's emotions and you tied it to fear-based theology and you then gate-kept salvation, then you all of a sudden had a power, that mechanism that not only allowed you to ensure that your institution would be part of the elite, but it also, you found a system that could perpetually fund you and ensure that your institution would be secure. So that has led to a lot of traumatic behavior towards people.
Reverend Carla started following Jesus as a young girl living in Kentucky. She was raised Southern Baptist and assumed she would be forever. But when she realized how much she was questioning things about her faith, Rev Carla began the journey of navigating her Christian identity. While in her 50s, she returned to college for biblical and world religious studies and then went on to seminary, where she was ordained as an interspiritual minister. She refers to herself as a spiritual nomad as she untangles her own faith and understanding of God. By sharing her writing online, Rev Carla helps over 600,000 followers on their healing journey to remove God from the box many of us have put him in. And that journey starts with recognizing any damage the church has inflicted on you.
So when you look at people who don't understand, when they start to deconstruct and they don't even understand that they've experienced abuse, any type of spiritual gaslighting, bypassing, any time that you were told that you were less than, or somehow a pastor wielded some judgment over you while you saw another person come out of the same situation unscathed. All of that stuff parks inside you as some level of harm. And so being able to label that as abuse validates the emotions that many of us have suppressed because we were taught that our feelings weren't valid.
Religious trauma arises from various experiences within a religious community, church, or spiritual group, where members are subjected to indoctrination, coercion, humiliation, embarrassment, and abuse. In the evangelical church, this often takes the form of the fear of eternal hell. Believing that you are inherently sinful, the suppression of normal, healthy sexual development, the pressure of purity culture, the encouragement of physical punishment, sexism, exposure to authoritarian leadership, and more. Religious trauma can have a significant impact on a person from childhood to adulthood. The constant shame and fear takes a toll on your physical and mental health. Rev Carla understands firsthand the profound impact that religious indoctrination can have on our lives, and she works tirelessly to help people break free from its limitations. In her online course, Deconstructing Christianity, and her upcoming book, Deconstructing, Leaving Church, Finding Faith, Rev Carla offers valuable insight into the process of deconstruction and the important steps you can take to navigate an often difficult journey. The term deconstruction has grown in prominence in recent years, but there's no single definition of what it means. It looks different for everyone, but for this conversation, we'll define it as the practice of dissecting the ideas, practices, or beliefs that make up your religious identity. You look critically at the entirety of your religious experiences and indoctrinated beliefs to discern what was true, what was manipulative and harmful, and what was meaningful. Deconstructing doesn't always mean you lose your faith. Instead, you can rebuild your faith from the ground up, salvaging the parts that feel more authentic to how you perceive God.
Deconstructing is work. It's also learning what it means to be a sacred activist. What does it mean to be a helpful ally? It's about restructuring how we look at the world and our place in it. And if we want our spirituality to reflect our humanity, then that means we are also focused about leaving this world a better place because we were in it. Working for the good of the whole, leaving a legacy of kindness. And that alone can be your practice. Yes, find these deconstructing spaces. Social media has become that place for so many people where you're learning to find community in these virtual groups because they're not necessarily emerging yet in the physical yet, but I think that's coming. I think you're going to start to see more of these spiritual but not religious questioning groups showing up. And I think that will be kind of like what y'all are doing with Red, White, and Blue and all the different kinds of, I think you're going to start to see that kind of thing. But you just look for those spaces and spend time. And I think that sometimes it means just sitting on your front porch with a cup of coffee or your favorite tea and listening to nature and realizing that part of what you do not need to be racist and homophobic or judgmental to be a good person. And that sometimes just means that you have to sit with yourself and see how did that serve you and be accountable for it and then start to let it go. It's a segue into the questioning mind that will gently start to open things for you so you can consider what's rising for you. What do you need to, what are the questions that you have right now? You might not even be able to ask those questions because you don't know. All you know is that something's off and you need to go explore it. And don't be afraid of that, the solitude that you need to be able to do that. Because for so long, once again, we've been told how to pray, what to believe, how to worship, and we check all those boxes and we leave on Sunday and we're a good Christian and we don't think about it. Oh no, deconstructing is a whole other thing. You're taking responsibility for your spirituality in a beautiful, healing way, but that means taking responsibility for it. And it's empowering once you do that.
And that's exactly what Katie Paris and Shane Claiborne did. They took a step back, decided what Christianity meant to them, then let that faith fuel their activism. The difference they've made in the world and in people's lives cannot be overstated.
No matter who you are, what faith background you come from, you're welcome here. At Red, White, and Blue, we want to welcome women to engage with us on these issues and values we care about. And if you come from, an evangelical background that was more conservative, wow, that's pretty brave for you to question some of the assumptions that you grew up with and to be asking some pretty big questions. And so we don't want to tell women who haven't always been with us, you're not welcome here. We want to say exactly the opposite and say, come along and let's do this together.
I think there's probably people listening to your show that, don't affiliate as Christians or they care about people. They care about justice. And I think that's where we can say, well, let's work together, right? Let's work for the common good. Let's work. There's an interesting story in the Gospels where the disciples of Jesus come up to him and they say, there's a guy down the street that's doing miracles and prophecies, but he's not one of us. Should we tell him to stop? And Jesus' response is beautiful. He says, no, if he's not against us, he's for us. And I think there's a lot of things that we are for together, that we can work towards love and the love of neighbor, the flourishing of our neighbors and people of all faiths and no faith in particular. And the other thing that's interesting about that Matthew 25 verse is that I think Mother Teresa is right. when she said that when we get to heaven, there may be some surprises. Some of the people who pretended to be Christians may not have been quite as close to Christ and the gospel as they might have thought they were, and others that may have been caring for the poor and the forsaken people in our world may have known little about Christ. And that's why it's so interesting in Matthew 25. Some people go, "When did we feed you? Like, when did we see you?" And Christ says, "When you did it to them, you did it to me." So, with C.S. Lewis basically said, I don't think the world exists in 100% Christian and 100% non-Christian. That's too binary, that the world's more complicated. People are more complicated than that. And so there are people that would say that they are Christian that seem to be looking less and less like Christ. And there are other people that are really seem to have a heart full of love and justice. But they might not call themselves Christians. And so it's not our job to be the gatekeepers of who's in and who's out. We keep our eyes centered on the love of God, and we keep our eyes centered on those who are suffering in the world and on Jesus, and we continue to move towards that love together. So I think there's something liberating in that, right? And just saying, I'm going to live. I'm going to live out this gospel of love. And for some folks, I would say, like, don't give up on Jesus because of the haters. Don't give those who have sort of tried to camouflage their own bigotry under the flag of Christianity. Let's not give them the power to colonize our faith. Let's continue to declare that it is a faith that is about love, that's about the welcoming of people, about how we treat the most vulnerable, the widows and the orphans, the least of these. That's at the very heart of our faith. And so let's keep living out a better song.
If you want to help push back against the dangerous rhetoric that's being spread by Christian nationalists, regardless of your faith, there are plenty of easy actions you can take. First, identify the causes that align with your values and find local community groups that advocate for those issues. Organizations like Red, Wine, and Blue and Red Letter Christians provides an easy on-ramp for both the experienced and inexperienced activist. Take advantage of their resources and bring your friends and family along for the ride. That'll be way more fun anyway. Utilize social media and other platforms to spread the message. You have the world at your fingertips. Use that power. And most importantly, vote this November 5th, from the top of the ballot all the way down to the bottom.
What does it look like to be motivated by love? What would our immigration policies look like if it was love rather than fear? And Scripture has a lot to say about this, that perfect love casteth out fear. Fear and love are like opposing forces in the world. And so we have to choose between love and fear. And I think a lot of what we hear is about fear. It's about this idea of persecution and all of this like fear mongering that's out there that is a direct contradiction of love. So what would our policies look like? What does it look like to vote with love in our hearts? And what does it look like to advocate with love for those whose lives are at stake, whose liberties are at stake in our country and in the world right now? Those Jesus called the least of these, the widows and the orphans, right? So in the end, like Jesus says in Matthew 25, that we'll be judged. And according to Jesus, the litmus test for how we're doing as a nation, it says all the nations are gathered before God, is not how the Dow Jones is doing or how the millionaires are doing. It's how those Jesus called the least of these are doing. Did we feed Christ when he was hungry? Did we welcome Christ when he was homeless or a stranger, an immigrant, a refugee? How do we treat those in prison? How do we treat those who are sick and provide health care for those who need it? So this is all, at the very heart of our faith. So a lot of these issues, we think of politics, but the word politics has the root of people, the citizenry, the polis. And what it looks like to love my neighbor as myself means I care about the policies that affect their lives, that allow them to flourish or not to flourish. And I think the idea that Christians won't be political is a mirage.
This work is more important now than ever. With the rise of Christian nationalism and the threat of Project 2025, we all need to come together to push back against this extremism. Together, we can create a better tomorrow.
Always remember that you're one person, but you're one person who counts, and continue to work for the good of the whole. You're going to be all right, and we're going to be all right.
Sacred Politics is hosted and narrated by Jill Jonasson, produced by Abigail Martin and Ashley Hufford, and written and edited by Abigail Martin.